The Empire of Benin is probably one of the most precious gems in all of West African history. What up, African world? It's your boy Home Team here. I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And today we're going to talk about the Benin Empire. Now, despite it being overlooked for many centuries, Benin is probably one of the most precious gems in all of West African history. And three facts still remain. The Benin Empire was one of the longest lasting empires in all of West African history. It constructed a mega structure not seen anywhere else in the world, and its art greatly influenced all who laid eyes on it. The Benin Empire was located in southern Nigeria, and its people began its dominance in about 1180 to 1897, one of the longest lasting empires in all of West African history. The Benin Empire was one of the oldest and most highly developed states in West Africa. The founders of Benin were the Edo people, and they were led by Ogiso, some interpreting that as the king of the sky. Oba Owari the Great turned Benin into an empire. He formed political structures in the kingdom, greatly expanded the territory of the kingdom, and fostered the arts and festivals into what we know it as today. Oral history recounts 201 victories by Oba Owari over the various cities and towns, creating an empire centered in Edo, even incorporating some Yoruba city-states into Benin authority. Around Benin City, Owari built significant walls, large walls within the city, and clearly divided zones for different craft work. Archaeological evidence has found that the walls built around the palace and the city, and even out into the country, were significant constructions taking multiple years to complete. In addition, he rebuilt the palace and created a clear division between it and the rest of the capital city. The architecture of the Benin Empire was very unique. With the Benin gates and walls, well-established Portuguese travelers were lured in due to the various architectural structures they witnessed. Travelers to Benin hailed it as the Great Benin. One 17th century Dutch traveler had this to say about the city. The king's palace or court is a square and is as large as the town of Haarlem and entirely surrounded by a special wall like that which encircles the town. It is divided into many magnificent palaces, houses, and apartments of the courtiers, and comprises beautiful and long square galleries about as large as the exchange at Amsterdam, but one larger than another, resting on wooden pillars from top to bottom, covered with cast copper, on which are engraved with pictures of their war exploits and battles. The Benin Empire was very organized, and it even had its own flag. The Edo people were mobilized by Owari the Great, and they invested in many different defensive structures and tactics. The Edo people were so dedicated to military prowess that they built one of the most impressive structures in all of Africa. The walls of Benin were the largest man-made structure lengthwise and was hailed as the largest earthwork in the world. It's estimated that the earliest construction began in 800 and continued into the mid-15th century. The walls of Benin City was the world's largest man-made earth structure, and a quote from Fred Pierce of The New Scientist has this to say about the walls of Benin. They extended for some 9,900 miles in all, in a mosaic of more than 500 interconnected settlement boundaries. They cover 2,510 square miles and were all dug by the Edo people. In all, they are 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramids of Cheops. They took an estimated 150 hours of digging to construct, and are perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet. That's a pretty impressive feat for a small empire like Benin, putting itself on the world stage architecturally. One can't speak about Benin without mentioning its artistic splendor. The art from the Benin Empire is magnificent and exemplifies the glory of West African civilization. In the art of Benin, works in bronze can be commissioned only by the Oba, or ruler, or by others with his permission. According to oral traditions, the technique of lost wax bronze casting was brought to Benin around the end of the 14th century from Ife, the ancient kingdom to the north, noted for its exquisite cast bronze commemorative heads. It seems as though the Edo people absorbed some of the beautiful art they witnessed from other Africans in the region, specifically the Yoruba. They continued this tradition, making it their own. For British officials were increasingly interested in controlling trade in the area and in accessing the empire's rubber resources to support their own growing tire market. At the end of the 19th century, the Kingdom of Benin had managed to retain its independence, and the Oba exercised a monopoly over trade, which annoyed the British greatly. So the British wanted to annex Benin and remove the Oba. First, the British tried to make Benin sign a deceptive treaty that would make them a protectorate. Because of this, the Oba barred all British officials and traders from entering Benin territories. The British took this as a hostile act. In November, James Robert Phillips made a formal request to his superiors in England for permission to invade Benin City. And in late December 1896, without waiting for a reply or approval from London, Phillips embarked on a military expedition with 2 Niger Coast Protectorate Force officers, a medical officer, 2 trading agents, 250 African soldiers masquerading in part as porters and in part as a drum and pipe band. To disguise their true intent, the force's weapons were hidden in the baggage carried by the porters. His request to London was to depose the King of Benin City, replace him with a native council, and pay for the invasion with the ivory he hoped to find in the Benin King's palace. In the meantime, he sent a message forward to the Oba, Benin's king, that his present mission was to discuss trade and peace, and demanding admission to the territory in defiance of Benin law, explicitly forbidding his entry. Unfortunately for Philip, some other African trading officials sent a message to the Benin king that, quote, the white man was bringing war. On receiving the news, the Benin king quickly summoned the city's high-ranking nobles for an emergency meeting, and during the discussions, the Yase, the commander-in-chief of the Benin army, argued that the British were planning a surprise attack and must be defeated. The Benin king, however, argued that the British should be allowed to enter the city so that it can be ascertained whether or not the visit was a friendly one. The Yase ignored the king's views and ordered the formation of a strike force that was commanded by Ologbosiri, a senior army commander. This preemptive strike on the British and African forces was pretty much a slaughterfest. Only 2 British officers survived the annihilation of Philip's expedition. Of course, the British had to retaliate after that humiliation and led what was called the Punitive Expedition. This force was led by Harry Walson. On February 9th, the assault began. The invasion force was composed of 3 columns, the Sapoba, Guato, and main columns. The Sapoba column consisting of Royal Marines and sailors, the Guato column was made up of 100 Royal Marines and sailors, and the main column consisted of 120 British Marines and 100 British sailors, 30 African scouts, and 250 African troops of the Niger Coast Protectorate Force. The most heavily defended region of Benin was the region of Guato. the British royal forces met the greatest Benin defense, led by Commander Okako. After a bitter and bloody battle, the British were forced to withdraw. After the withdrawal, the British royal forces tried a second time and were again kept at bay on the outskirts of the Benin city. Then, ironically, the African force of the Niger Coast Protectorate relieved the British forces and conquered the city, burning down the city and looting. This was the end of the Benin Empire. The troops began looting the city and taking Benin artifacts and sending it back to British museums. The art of Benin was so moving and majestic that its dispersal around the world forced people to reassess how they viewed Africans in general. As one cannot look at the sophistication and beauty of Benin art and justify their old, adulterated, and backward view of African people. The Benin Empire was unique in that it single-handedly forced people to view all West Africans differently. The art of Benin was copied, and the style was integrated into the art of many European artists, and thus had a strong influence on the early formation of modernism in Europe. The culture and magnificent art of Benin can sometimes make historians reevaluate and question who the real conquerors were. The ones who captured the city, or the ones who captured the mind. Well, I'm all out, guys. I hope you guys learned something about the Empire of Benin. And if you guys are interested in learning more about African history, culture, and worldview, I teach full-blown African history lessons at Patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. It's your boy, Home Team. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.